when you're ready, sir.
Thank you all for joining in. So we're going to start off with the items that we have in your kit bag, and the first thing we'll use is the mini pump. So on the mini pump, you will have two holes for the different two valve types. So on the wider hole, that is the same as Schrader, which you will see on most kids bikes or most mountain bikes, and that just matches to the wider hole. And the second one is the Presta, which is the narrow, more delicate valve, and probably used again on hybrids and probably more so on race bikes. So the one pump will just use either valve without having to make any adjustments. And what you also have on the mini pump is the pressure bar. So you see the pressure needle on there. So the three most popular kind of PSI measurements would be probably 20 if it's a buggy or a pram, 40 if it's a kid's bike or a mountain bike, 60 PSI if it's a hybrid, and possibly up towards 90 or even 100 PSI if it's a lightweight race bike. Is that okay? So the next thing we will look at is how to remove a front wheel. So if we have the bike and you have the V-brake system like what I have, you squeeze the two brakes together and unhook the brake, and the two brake pads come apart. Next thing we do is unhook the lever on the left hand side. The wheel can't fall off, but if I undo the nut on the right hand side, it allows the wheel to drop through the fork. It's off. So putting this guy back on again, bring the wheel back up into the fork, sit him up, close the right hand guy, he's like the adjuster, and the left hand side is the lock. If the left hand side closes too easily, we must go for a few more turns on the right hand side until the lever closes with that little bit of resistance to close it in. And it's also better to close the lever in at the back of the fork and not against the fork, which makes it more difficult to get your fingers in behind to open. So always try and close the lever a little bit behind the fork. And then when we're finished that, the wheel goes back on, you just hold the two brake levers or the two brake calipers together, and the U-bend hooks back into place, and our brakes are back working again. If it was a disc brake system, you wouldn't really have to touch the brakes at all. You'd open the lever, and the wheel will just drop straight off. The same process with the back. We would undo the little bend on the back. The trick with removing a rear wheel is the bike must always go into the hardest gear on the back. And the next the gear changes, that the wheel drops out into the hardest gear the bike has. The smallest sprocket on the back. Now we open the lever, and the wheel just drops, pull back the rear neck, and the wheel just drops straight off. All of this stuff is probably best done with the bike kept in an upright position. There's nothing really much that's done on the bike with the bike turned upside down. All you end up doing is marking the saddle and marking the grips. So anything that we do, even though I have a work stand, if I didn't have the work stand, I'd still be working on the bike with the bike in an upright position. So put this wheel back on. The bottom section of the chain goes on the underneath. The top section of the chain goes back onto the smallest bracket, which is the one it came from, and then just bring the wheel back up into place, and it sits back up into the frame, and we close the lever to lock it back in again. Now I can do that again for you because it's not as complicated as it looks. Open the lever with the chain on the smallest bracket, pull the neck back a little bit, and the wheel just drops straight through. Nothing can fall off. This neck is attached with an Allen key bolt, so nothing can come away. All you've got is the bike, with everything staying attached, and the wheel. So bring the wheel back up bottom of the chain on the underside, the top of the chain must rest on the smallest sprocket. Back up into the frame and close the lever. Again, you can do some small adjustments on the right hand side if you need to get the right amount of resistance on the lever. Close the lever, and we're back. Is that okay? Next, we'll go and just pretend that we've got a flat. So we'll just take off this front wheel for that purpose. We just leave the air with this guy. So when you get to this point, that the air is released from the tire, before you even try to take the tire off, the trick here is to flick the tire back away from the rim all the way around and break the seal that the tire might have with the rim. And we do that on both sides. Just push your thumbs against the tire all the way around, and you feel the tire actually getting looser as you've done that. That tire is quite flexible. Now we'll use our levers that we have in our pack. We go away from the valve a little bit, and we'll put one lever underneath and give him a flick out. Now, the trick now is not to use the next lever too far away. Try and work within about 2 spoke lengths of the first lever. There we go. That's after releasing a little bit. And now next lever, next time a little bit further along. If you try to work too far away, you're going to create too much pressure and the tire won't remove. So now we've kind of gotten the first bit removed. We've loosened off the tire, and the rest will really come off with your fingers. Take that tube out. There's no need to remove the full tire. Only one side is all we have to release the pressure on. Take that tube out. So if we were at home and you wanted to use your little patch kit, pump the tube with a couple of pumps of air. So with this tube, it's the Presta. So we'll use the narrow valve on the tire or on the pump. Once you put the narrow valve into the pump, you must flick the lever downwards. That creates an airtight seal, and now we can pump air into that tube. Only a small bit. And then with the traditional basin of water, you can just see where the puncture is. If you find it, we can use a little patch kit. So we'd have, like before on the patch kits from years ago, a little bit of sandpaper, so you can rough up wherever the hole is. And then these new patch kits don't require any glue. It's actually just a little self-adhesive patch, so much cleaner, much quicker. There's no glue to dry, no glue to set. Just find your hole, leave it dry, a little bit of sandpaper, patch goes on, and it's actually a very quick seal. And that didn't take actually. Go again. There we go. And that patch is ready then. That's a seal that can be put back into the bike nearly straight away. If it was before you put in the tube back into the bike, we would need to check the tire that there's no glass or corn in the tire. So carefully run your fingers, now very slowly and carefully, but it must be done, run your fingers inside the tire to check for a sharp stone, grit, glass, corn. There could be anything in there. And then sometimes there could be nothing in there, but you just have to be careful and just check the whole way around the tire but you have to do it ultra slowly because if there's glass, it could be dangerous for you. Another thing worth checking is the rim tape itself. This is a new bike. This rim tape is all nice and clean and fresh. If it's an older bike with old rubber rim tapes, they can get a little bit frayed and a bit stretched. And you can either put new rim tape on, or there's no harm to put a layer of the insulating tape over the existing rim tape to put an extra layer of protection between the tube and the spoke heads.
Dave, just a quick question for you is why don't you run the tool around the inside of the tire to get the tube free?
Sorry?
Why don't you run the tool around the inside of the tire to get the tube free?
Run the tool around the inside of the tire to get the
tube free. We have a question from Michael in there, so just going around why you're going around the outside of the tire there.
To take the tube free, once you release the tire on one side, the tube virtually falls out. So I'll go back to the valve hole and put this tube back in. And if I fed that tube into the tire, once I've released to one side of the tire, that tube doesn't really require any pressure. That tire is quite loose now, and this tube nearly falls. It nearly falls out. The tire levers are just to remove the first side of the tire. And when that tire is opened up on one side, the tube just peels away. Is that okay?
Yeah, I think Michael wants to come in and explain there. So Michael, if you want to unmute yourself there, it's no problem, buddy.
So what I was meaning is when you are loosening the tire from the frame and you put the tool in to begin with, and then you hooked it onto the spoke.
Yes.
Normally when I'm on the road or something like that, I'll put the second tool in and I'll just run it straight around instead of unclipping it, moving two spokes down, putting the tool in, then levering it off. Then is there any?
I would move two spokes along. Just to make sure the tire is free enough before I could run the tool all the way around. But some tires, if it was a race bike or a more a high pressure bike, you would need to actually release the tire 2 or 3 times along before the tire will free itself enough to run the tool all the way around. So on this bike, this tire is quite free. I could well have done that, but if it was a race bike, you need to actually work the levers a little bit more. So 1 spoke, 2 spoke, over again, and eventually when the tire starts to release its pressure on the rim, then you can just flick the lever the rest of the way around.
Okay.
It's just trying to work out at what point do you start to do that. I just went for the safe way, so you have the correct routine until the tire has released enough to flick the lever, and then it will just release itself all the way around. So
great, thank you.
No problem.
Thanks, Michael.
If you are putting in a new tube and not going to put a patch on, most new tubes come out of the box fairly well vacuum packed, and a tube in this form is very, very difficult to put back into a tire, because as you try to feed the tube in, it'll probably keep falling out behind you. So really, when you have a new tube like this, you must put a couple of shots of air into the tube to give it some shape. So even a couple of shots just to give it a small bit of shape means now the tire, this tube is going to go back into this tire a lot easier. So again, we start at the valve, put him in first, feed the tire over, and then slowly work the tube in over the lip of the rim. And as it's pumped, it shouldn't be falling out behind us, which I'm sure it would do if it was the flat tube that comes straight from the box. When we get back to the valve, we can start to flick in over the valve and work away from the valve. And we'll get to a point where we start to feel a little bit of resistance. And then when we get to that point, now we have to start working with our 2 tire levers again. So we just tire lever, flick him over. Now I can hold it with this tire lever, and on the next one I can work on the far side and close him in a little bit. And each time you do that, you're seeing the gap on the tire is getting a little bit closer. Flick him over. Don't try and go straight to the middle. The forces will be too much and you just won't be able to force it on. You'll end up breaking the lever. So small amounts from both sides, a little bit at a time, and that tire will eventually just flick back into place. We're kind of looking at this tire is kind of a flexible tire that does work. A race bike tire might require a little bit more forcing. But the thing is, only work with small amounts from the two sides at a time. The width of the spoke, go force it over. Width of the spoke, try again. Don't go straight to the middle. You just break the lever and you just cause yourself problems. When you get to the point where the tire is on, you want to make sure the valve is not caught under the tire. So just push the valve back up inside the tire 3 or 4 times. Make sure the tube is clearing the bottom of the tire, which it is. And now ready to just pump this back up. When you're pumping this with the mini pump, especially with a valve like this, to press the valve, which is quite narrow, you have the narrow valve. When he's closed, this guy is closed up fully. When he's open him down, he can't fall off. You touch him, air will release. So when you're pumping this kind of valve, always keep the valve up at 12 o'clock. Put the pump on, flick the lever to pump downwards, and keep the pump at a right angle to the valve. And lastly, always support the back of the pump with 1 or 2 fingers. So as you're pumping, you're not rocking the pump over and back, which will cause the valve to break. And then we just pump away on this. Now bear in mind, these mini pumps, the chamber of air is quite small, so be prepared to pump for a little bit longer than you would with a regular bigger pump. These are very much for the emergency roadside use. So pump away, and this will go back up to the right pressure. It just takes a little bit longer, but it will work. And then when you're finished pumping, we close the lever, and instead of actually crowbarring the pump off, we just give it one sharp tap downwards. So you're clearing the pump off the valve without touching or breaking the little end core. So if I was to kind of crowbar that off, I'm going to bend the end of that valve, which would cause problems for future pumping.
And Eamon, Dave, I'm right there. Just putting the valve back in first is important, just for the simple reasons of making sure you've got a better balance to putting the tube back in, isn't it?
Putting the valve back in first.
Putting the valve, when you're putting the tube back in, putting the valve in first and then feeding the tire around is easier, isn't it?
That's just good practice. Put the valve in first and then work the tube away from the valve till you come back around. And then you just kind of work away from the valve till you come to a point opposite the valve, where then you have to work the 2 tire levers in. So you're kind of keeping the valve away from any pressure off the tire levers. Just pop this back on. And it's actually quite important to have the right tire pressure. Like I mentioned earlier, the different pressure levels, but your bike will perform an awful lot better with the correct tire pressure. It will roll easier and you have a lot less chance of picking up a flat. And with the modern bikes, it could need pumping every 3 to 4 weeks. So if you can push your thumb down into a tire and make any kind of an impression, it's just a quick guide that I can do with top up. So I can sink my thumb into that tire a little bit, so it shows that tire could do it being pumped a little bit harder. So out for a bike ride, the bike will roll better for you, and you've got less chance of picking up a torn grip glass. So better all around to keep the tire pressure checked fairly regular. Is that all okay? Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. Next thing we look at is just oiling the bike. And I know there's a lot of bikes will come through and have an awful lot of oil all over the bike and just gets onto everything. And the more oil you put on your chain, the more dirt and grit off the road gets sucked up attach to the chain, and you just get a really big black oily mess, and you touch the chain, you're filthy. So the best way to keep the chain lubed is just to use your bottle of oil and only point it down at the bottom jockey wheel down here. And as I pedal backwards 3 or 4 times with the bike laying up or sitting up against the wall, just 3 or 4 revolutions backwards, and I've only put oil onto the chain only. I haven't coated the sprockets or the cassette or wire. All that happens here is oil gets trapped down between all the cassettes, and that becomes a gathering point for dirt. Or with the more modern bikes, if you've got a disc brake system, the disc brake is over here. So if I'm putting oil up high, there's a good chance the oil is going to get sprayed or splattered over onto the disc rotor, which is not what we want. So if it's just a light amount of oil down low on the bottom jockey wheel, it's safer, only oil in the chain only, and not allowing oils and stuff get onto the rotor.
Dave, what about oil, rust on, even, like I know oil in that chain, but even rust on anything in the bike frame? Have you any advice if there's any rust on a bike frame of how you can treat that?
Sometimes on older bikes, you would have had a lot of steel parts. You would have had steel rims and steel cranks, and they will be prone to rust. But thankfully, most of the modern bikes are using alloy rims, alloy cranks, alloy brake parts. So the only real steel parts left on bikes now is actually the points where the cables are actually bolted on. So the cable attachment points or the brake attachment points. And often with those, it's actually only surface rust. It's not coming through from the bike. It's actually rust from being left outside for a little bit, or if the weather is damp, you get rust coming, just condensation resting on the parts. So a little bit of Vaseline or a light grease onto some of those bolts is always just a little good way to keep the bike maintained. If there is some heavy rust on the bike, I mean, you can go back and just get the Brillo pad or a sandpaper to take it off. But most modern bikes with the alloy frames and aluminium and alloy rims and parts, they do not rust too much. That okay?
No, perfect, Dave. Yeah. I have one other thing for you, which I think
what is prone to rust, haven't got onto it, is things like cables. So if you've got a bike that's been sitting up for a couple of seasons or it's been out in the weather a little bit, you can get some of the gear cables and brake cables that can get rusted and can get sticky. Like a good brake cable or a good brake system should pull really with one finger. There's no resistance to the braking system. If you've got to pull your brakes really, really hard to get any reaction, more than likely you've got some rust or corrosion inside the brake lines, which means you've got to work the brake lever quite hard to make a reaction or to make a contact onto the rims. So with poor brake systems, there's kind of one of 2 reasons. Like I said, the corrosion inside the actual brake lines, or brake pads that are quite worn. Now, if you have a brake pad on a bike like this, the regular brake pad, you should see, you can see this, if you can see it here. There we go. Those little split lines down there, those are wear lines. So when those lines are not visible, those brake pads are due for replacement. So if you got brake pads that are just kind of a couple of seasons old, they will naturally wear. So most brake pads have what they call wear lines. There isn't wear lines, unfortunately, on disc brake systems, so that's going to be more of a tricky one. And disc brake pads by nature are much smaller and much harder to tell when they're worn. So I can't, there's no kind of easy trick on that. You can put a torch in to see, is our brake pad still visible? But they are a small, they're a small brake system. So our small brake pads, so sometimes I look in a store once a season just to check on that, might be safer than trying to judge for yourself. Especially with some brake systems have the hydraulic, which do need to just to be safe, need to be just given a look at once a season to be sure that everything is still okay for them.
Everybody, and one other thing I've just is the back wheel, taking a back wheel off with disc brake. So we're looking at that later on, aren't we?
Yeah, I have a bike here with a disc brake as well, so I can do that in a little while as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks. I'll shut up now. Don't worry. Sorry.
No, you're fine, because I don't want to get overly complicated, but I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has. So nobody's left wondering something that I can't, that they didn't want to, or that something that's trying for them to know something, throw the questions out, because I don't want to get overly complicated with people. So if there's questions out there, give them to me and we'll be happy to answer. Like the last little part of your kit is the Allen key tool. So I'll just get my disc brake bike. So the Allen key tool will fit most parts of the bike, but I don't want to kind of go into anything around the handlebar area from a pure safety point of view. I'd rather just keep that, they should all be tight from, like there's no harm to check them. Your Allen key tool will be able to give them a tighten, but I wouldn't like to anyone to go adjusting that like that themselves, because effectively the front of the bike is critical to the steering. So I'd be kind of put an Allen key tool in to check that these bolts on the side are tight. That's fine, but don't go adjusting that side of stuff unless you're totally confident with what you're doing. We mentioned saddle height a little earlier. So the Allen key tool here should fit into one of the sizes 4 or 5 will fit into your bolt on the side here of the saddle. Give him an open, and the saddle can adjust up or down. Now for me, this bike is probably a little bit small, but if I wanted this saddle at the correct height, I would sit on this bike, and maybe you can't see, but the ball of my foot is all we want on the floor. So we can see there now. Yeah, just the ball of my foot is all I want on the floor to create the correct pedaling action for me to be efficient while I'm pedaling. A lot of people think it's best to have their heels on the floor, but if your heel is on the floor, your knee just goes so high that you're getting no value from your cycling muscles at all, and all the power is being driven to your knees, which is just not good for, again, not good for efficiency and not good for your body. So just the ball of your foot in contact with the floor is quite a good guide for height of the seat. People tend to have the saddle a bit lower than they should, and you find then you tend to get tired a little bit easier or a little bit quicker. Now, because this is disc brake bike, we can go back, Peter, and we can just see about taking the wheel off. You said front wheel or back wheel? Back wheel, was it, Peter?
Sorry, Dave. Yeah, back wheel. Sorry, buddy. It's good. Mute button. Back wheel, so that'd be great.
So the same routine as earlier. We just flick the bike into the smallest gear. And with the disc brake, there's nothing to touch on the brakes. You're opening the lever, like we did earlier, and that wheel, when the neck is pulled back, that wheel will just fall through. So it comes off just as easy. The one difference with the disc brake system is when you have the wheel removed, it's important not to pull the brake lever, because that's a hydraulic system. If those brake pads compress in, they don't have the rotor to rebound off of to open back out again. So if you're traveling with your bike regular and have to remove wheels, you can get a little spacer that goes into those pads. So it just stops the chance of you putting the brake by accident. So that, yeah, there's nothing to take apart, nothing to adjust on those brakes while taking the wheel off, but it's important not to pull the brake while the wheel is removed. So putting that wheel back on. Hold the bike nice and upright, nice straight angle to the floor. Put the wheel on the floor as well. Don't hold everything in mid-air. Wheel on the floor. Put the bottom of the chain on underneath, and the top of the chain back onto the smallest jockey wheel, or sorry, the smallest cog. And now a little bit more careful, because now we've got to line up the wheel into the frame at the same time as lining up the rotor into the caliper. So it just takes a little more concentration to check that they're both all lined up at the same time. So it's a little bit slower lining up the rotor, but when you have it all vertical, it's just much easier to do, and using your smallest prop on the back as your guide. Close the lever, and he's back on. Makes sense? Is that okay? Yeah? Yeah. Peter, that's very much covering what was in the packs. Now I'm happy to answer anything else that anyone else has or wants to know. The little pump that was on the bike, or that's in your pack from earlier, has a little bracket. So if you're going to fit that pump to your bike, I would try and recommend that the pump is fitted on the side of the bike away from the gears. So you'll have little Allen key studs on your frame that will house a bottle cage. So if you're putting the pump onto those little studs, keep it just from pure safety. I think it's just safer not to have any accessories on the side where the gears are. So I would just put the pump on that side here, or if it's a men's bike with bottle cage studs on the down tube and the C tube, the pump can go there, but not recommended on the same side as the gear system. Not recommended really here. In case the pump ever loosen or fall off, it's going to drop straight down into your chain, into your gears, which is not good. So try and mount them on this side, away from the gears, or on the other side, but always away from the gears. Is that okay?
Perfect. I've got a couple of questions just on brakes.
Very good.
So how to tighten your brakes actually on the actual tire itself, and also on the handlebars. So if something is getting loose. So what's our best way of making sure our brakes are safe?
Yeah. I just take this bike off the stand so we can see it properly. If it's a bike with the cable brakes, there's always a quick adjustment, which is the levers or the adjusters up at the levers themselves. So this is the front brake. If I wanted to tighten that quickly, and I don't have access to tools, I can open this little lad here, a couple of turns, close the smaller one, and I've just created extra tension or taken some slack off that front brake. Now, that's a quick adjustment. The actual correct way to do it is to use your Allen key tool. So on this fella, it will be the size 5. Go to the brake, and we're going to have to squeeze the 2 cantilevers together. Open the bolt and pull the cable through. I've only put through a small amount. This is a new bike, and the brakes are already quite tight. And tighten this guy again. So that's your brake tightening. The correct way is from the bolt, but the easy, quick adjustment, if you were caught, is up at the lever. Is kind of the quick one. But the correct way is using the Allen key tool. Open the bolt, pull the cable through, only a small amount. Tighten that bolt again, nice and firm. They feel now quite tight. Now bear in mind, if you tighten your brakes too much, you don't allow any clearance. So if you picked up any dirt or debris, or you got a small little warp or buckle in the wheel, you won't have any leeway. So just be careful not to over tighten brakes either. You don't want to kind of have the brake pads with only millimeters of clearance. So a little bit of clearance is just safe. But that lever now is nearly too tight for me. I got very little clearance around those brake pads. Okay.
Thanks, Paddy. One other thing is just the rear derailleur. So what's your advice regarding the rear derailleur and adjusting it? So how do we adjust that?
Okay, we'll pop the bike back up on the stand. If you had a rear gear system that wasn't quite working correctly, now I'm going to adjust this so it's not going to change gears very well. So light that up, and I make a click of the lever up on the handlebar, and not a lot happens. You can see it's kind of making funny noises. It doesn't want to change. and clicky dumping noises, that's the chain effectively not really sure what gear is it in. Now, the trick here is 9 times out of 10, it's not going to be these little screws. I can bring the light a bit closer. But little adjusting screws. These are adjusting screws on the mech, and they're often set from factory or set from your bike store, and they set the parameter of movement that the mech has. So if you actually start adjusting these screws, you're giving the mech more leeway to move out further and in further, and that will just create room for this chain to jump down between the cog and the frame, or worse, go up and get caught between first gear and the spoke. So most of the time, they should be set correctly from factory or from the store, and the adjustment has to come from the tension adjuster on the actual cable itself. So when you got gear problems, most of the time is the cable itself has stretched, and you need to do the fine tuning, half a turn on the adjuster just to get the chain to line back up correctly. Now, it's not easy to do without having a work stand, and it needs a little bit of time. And also, if the bike ever took a fall, you got to be careful that the rear gear system on the back here, because it's exposed, check that it's actually in line. If you got a gear system that's a little bit bent inwards from a knock or a fall, it throws out all the gears, and any bit of adjustment won't solve it. It'll just need to come into a store for either a new mech or a new hanger. So gear tuning can sometimes be very, very slight and very small. Other times there's a bigger issue going on. So it's one of those things. It's very hard to know what it's going to be all the time.
So if in doubt, give you a shout.
Gears, yes. Yeah, with gears, yes, but they can be tricky, they can. Even worn parts have an effect. You've got a bike that's 4 or 5 years old, or 3 or 4 years old, and you've got a chain that's got worn. At some point, that chain will start to slip on the cogs just from pure mileage, and any bit of tuning won't solve the fact that the chain has got too many miles on it, and it just needs to be given some new parts. So gear tuning is one element. Worn out chain or worn out cassette is the other element, other part of the problem if it's an older bike.
And I have the same question for the front derailleur, if possible.
Yeah, front derailleur is actually even more tricky. But the front derailleur has no adjuster on the derailleur. The adjuster is up on the lever. So up where earlier when we had the brake lever adjustments, on the gear lever, there is a little adjuster as well. You'll only see it on the left-hand side. And again, for him, it's half a turn either way to take the slack off the chain. And again, the front mech also has those adjuster screws, again, which we would hope nobody will go at themselves. Because again, they're set if they're set in the wrong place, the mech will go over and bring the chain with it over the top, or drop inwards too far and bring the chain with it, and the chain will drop in onto the frame and cause marks. So front mech adjustment again must come from the little barrel adjuster on the lever, but again it takes a little bit of experience to get the balance right on that kind of stuff.
And then for racers, the front derailleur adjuster at the same place, isn't it?
For racers, yes, it would be. Some racers have the brake lever adjuster at this point. The older bikes have it at this point here on the frame, and the more modern bikes will probably have it up closer to the up on the levers. Yeah. For rear gear change, it'll always be at the back here. So for the front gears, it'll be up on the lever, or sometimes up on there's a section of cable that has an adjuster built in. But for rear gear change, it's always going to be on the little adjuster at the gear change itself.
It's a nice question.
It's always half a turn. There's never anything radical. It's only half a turn. If you don't have a work stand, it's maybe change it half a turn, go for a quick bike ride down the road for 10, 20, 30 meters, see how it changes, come back, another small half a turn adjustment. Nothing radical, nothing big. It's a small adjustment, go for a little spin, see how it feels, come back, try again. So be prepared to have a bit of patience when you're trying to get gears to line up properly. It's not going to be always quick and easy. A little bit of patience needed.
Patience is a virtue, Dave. Top man. It's a nice question, actually, particularly with people after COVID, is if a bike has been on an indoor trainer for a while, what's your advice on checking cables and making sure the bike is in a roadworthy condition if it's been up on a turbo trainer?
Yeah, the one thing that kind of the turbo trainer creates is a lot of salt around the front area up here. So not everybody throws the towel over the front of the bike when they're on the turbo, and you get a lot of salt that drops down around the bolts in this area and sometimes into the steering. So that steering column here has got bearings on the top and bearings on the bottom. And again, the turbo can cause, the fact that the bike is stationary means that the steering is not being used for 3 or 4 months, and also there's sweat dripping down onto those bearing points or Allen key points. So yeah, often it's the front of the bike that gets most of the hardship when you come off the winter season on the indoor bike. After that, it's a matter of just seeing again what the cables are like. Are the cables all free? Does the chain need lubrication? And yeah, I mean, really, it's the front of the bike will take most hardship on the turbo.
So that's perfect. Thanks, Dave.
If it's running on a roller. Oh, and yeah, and if the back tire is on one of the roller systems, you can get a flat section on the tire after a season of use. So that tire may well not be able for a full season of road cycling. So that's something to check as well. The tires tend to flatten if they're on the resistance of a roller for a number of months. You get a flat spot on the tire that does kind of tend to kill the tire.
Is there any specifics that you say is a no-go? Like we all try and maintain our own bike, which is important, but obviously if we're going at some speeds or roundabouts and something fails, it could be a bit of bother. So what's the no-go areas that we shouldn't do ourselves and we should get ourselves to a bike shop?
Very much the front of the bike is just critical. So if the bolts that hold the stem or the steering in place, that's the most important area of the bike. So if anyone's unsure, you just don't go at that front area. Steering, the brake system, but more so, I'd be always worried about that the front stem, the handlebars, always make sure that front wheel is tightened correctly. And this skewer system, it must close with a reasonable amount of resistance to make sure it's closed properly. If I close this and I can close it with one finger, that's not closed. That could bounce open. So that's way too easy for that skewer to close. It must close with me having to use a reasonable amount of closing force for that to lock. So yeah, front of the bike is the kind of the critical part of the bike. And probably just taking your time doing stuff. Check what you're doing, and I mean, there's nothing if you're washing the bike, oiling the bike, checking tires for cuts and cracks, checking your brake pads. It's more precautionary stuff is what's best to do as opposed to tackling a maintenance job that you're not sure of. So the precautionary stuff keeps you ahead of the curve. Checking there's no cuts on your tire, checking your brake pads are good, checking your bike is clean, chain's not got too much oil on, there's no frayed cables. So even when you're washing your bike reasonably regular, you're subliminally picking up on the condition of the bike. So that you're kind of seeing, oh, that cable is a bit frayed or that brake pad's a bit worn. You're catching stuff that you wouldn't see if you don't maintain your bike. So a clean bike that's been washed reasonably regular, you're catching stuff before it gets to cause you problems on the road.
And final question for you, Allen keys. So this the Allen keys that we get given, the idea behind them is that they can fit different mechanisms, different types of bikes, isn't it? So
yes, the Allen key set that we have probably fits nearly most of the Allen key points on this bike. So if you were to decide to replace a brake pad on this bike, that Allen key tool will fit that. If it was to do a bit of cable tightening, it will fit that as well. Saddle adjustment, one will fit that as well. The handlebars, it will fit I just don't recommend doing anything with the handlebars. So yeah, the Alki tool, if you were to fit a bottle cage to the bike, the bottle cage or the mini pump bracket, you got a key for those studs as well. Yeah, so this Alki tool, yeah, it's a handy thing to keep safe because it'll fit most of what you're going to need for small bike maintenance.
Well, Dave, I think that's all. Any final words of wisdom from you to sum up, my friend?
Enjoy the bike. Yeah, at the start of a new season, just get out, ride the bike.
Tire pressure.
Yeah, so tire pressure is good, as in if you don't ride the bike too regular, keep a check on the tire pressure. If you're not a regular bike rider, bear in mind the first spin back, if it's a good weekend and you haven't ridden the bike in a few months, your first spin back won't be the most comfortable. So don't just blame the saddle straight away for a bad spin. More than likely, you need 2 or 3 spins together to take your shape of a bike that you haven't ridden in a few months. So don't come back thinking, wow, that was horrible. Give the bike another chance or two, like a spin once a week will mean the saddle will take your shape and you won't have backside issues. So the sporadic cyclist tends to sometimes feel, oh, the saddle's killing me. The more regular cyclist, the saddle takes your shape and you just have no problems at all. Yeah, and small amounts of cycling regular, so you can't beat our scenery or fresh air, can't beat it.
And one final one there just jumped in is hydraulic brakes. So what's your recommendation on maintaining your hydraulic brakes? Bring them into the shop rather than doing them yourself?
No, definitely bring them into the shop, because there is syringe kits and oils, different types of oils that hydraulic oils need. Now, most of our systems are fairly well sealed from brake caliper, or from the brake caliper up to the lever. So there's really not much maintenance needed on the hose itself, unless the bike got damaged or got caught in a crash. It's just more so it's brake pad wear, and that can differ from a mountain bike user to a road bike user. But the hydraulics themselves generally is a job for the workshop. It really is.
Okay, that's great. No, thank you so much for that. Just saying to everyone, as Dave says, just get out. It's great, isn't it? Like get the wind in your hair. Kind of happy days. COVID, with being locked down and everything else, within 5 kilometers now, go as far as possibly can. And I think just get out and socialize with each other in a safe environment. Any questions? I'd recommend you go to Dave or any bike shops you have, just to make sure that you are safe on that bike. I will be sending this recording out to you via email, so I'll send it out tomorrow. If there's any questions, I'll put my email, and there'll be Eamon and Dave's email from Altitude on there as well. And there's so many free bike events. Like, I know there's a lot of people from Waterford here. There's people in Tipperary. Unfortunately, our American participant probably won't be able to fly over and take part in some of our lunchtime cycles, etc. But check out Eventbrite, have a look. If you want to get out and use your kind of bike maintenance skills and now get out on the bike, we'd be delighted to see you. So thanks a million, Dave. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Stay safe, have a great week, and have a great year of cycling.
Great.
Good luck, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.